All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Angie Railing. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a prevention coordinator with WACASA. I am here with Shantell for our next webinar in our Survivor Centered series. I will turn it right over to Shantell so we can get started right away. Just thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your passion. And thank you for community today.
Thank you. Thank you, Angie. Blessings, everyone. As Angie mentioned, I am Shantell. I'm a human being first, so we'll start there. I'm a registered nurse. I am an end of life doula. I am a certified grief counselor. And also I am a trauma informed practitioner. I serve in the capacity of providing support to individuals when they are preparing for like end of life, or if they're having a transition, or if there is grief support for individuals after they experience a loss. So when Angie kind of like approached me about the different webinars that they were doing and like different topics, it was like, let's talk about grief. I like to talk about grief, and I like to talk about grief from the aspect of it is more than just death. And we have created a relationship that grief just equals death. And it's like, it's so much greater than that. And it's way bigger than that. And how things that are occurring in our lives also cause us to grieve. So, wanted to be able to do a webinar that actually could make this connection for individuals and in this space when there are survivors with sexual assault and also people who are supporting survivors, that there is a relationship and connection with grief. And Angie kind of already mentioned that the topic that we are talking about is a very heavy topic, and allowing yourself to be able to do what you need to be able to have that gentleness and protection for yourself. So if you need to step away, you need to take a break. Um, this actually is being recorded, so if at some point that this is not a good time for you, or you feel that it may be overwhelming or too much, you can step away, and this will be available for you to come back at a later time. And so, what the goal or the intention, as what we would like to be able to do today, is to talk about the uniqueness of grief when it comes down to sexual assault survivors, and also being supportive to individuals, and strategies for like advocates and supporters of sexual assault. So I think number one thing that we need to talk about is like, what is grief? So, like I said, trying to pull this relationship away from grief just automatically being connected to death. So, grief is the response to a loss. The loss could actually be the loss of a loved one, it could be the loss of a relationship, the loss of a job, and the loss of parts and experiences of our lives that something happened and it caused them to actually go away or to change. I like to use the relationship of something like a car. So, a car, you got this car in high school, and you have took this car to college and whatever your life journey may have been. So you could have taken this car on your first road trip, to your first concerts, and having these different experiences, going and hanging out with friends. And you've had this car for several years. And all of a sudden, the car stops working. And it's not just about the car not working, but the experiences that you were able to have with this car, and how, like, I remember going to my first concert. Like, I remembered like this freedom that I received when I got this car. And now that I don't have this car, how all of these things that I had, I'm losing them in this connection to this car. And now I feel frustrated. I might feel sad. I might feel like, well, is there anything that I can do to save this car? Like, Could it be something like a battery? Like what do I need to do to be able to save this car because of the importance that I have experienced of the things that I was able to do with this car. So, grief is the relationship of losing something that was important to you. So, if we start to think about now, just think about what's important to you now, and that is okay. So, you're like, it could be my my cat is important to me. My dog is important to me. My family is important to me. You might actually have a book that you read that is like really important to you and it's like this really connection, a journal that you may have, a piece of jewelry, an outfit, something that's really important to you. And if you think about that, say I give you just a couple seconds to think of like what's important to me right now, like what would be something you would think of that's really important to you right now. And you don't have to, we do have a chat that you can actually put those answers in the chat, or just really truly just thinking about like what's important to me now. So from there, when you think of things that are important to you, think of how you would feel if you lost that thing or those things that were important to you, and what type of feelings and emotions that will come up with that. And so that's grief. And when we go through the different ranges of emotions and feelings, and typically when people talk about grief, they typically make the relationship between Elizabeth Kluber-Ross's and the stages of grief. And we talk about these griefs being there is the stages, and I'm going to air quote the term stages because it's not like something you step up and you go through at each level. This is something that it kind of is like this roller coaster. Um, I like that the like now guarding and growing and your safety is really important. So like I mentioned with grief. So just imagine if that was something that was lost. An event happened, something happened, and that was lost. And so then you're moving through these different types of stages of grief because of that. So when we look at our stages, we're looking at denial, we're looking at bargaining, we're looking at anger, acceptance, depression, and not in that order. So I kind of like flip that where we say stages. So typically it would say depression and then acceptance, but doing that for the fact to remind us that there is not this step phase that it's going through. So sometimes we'll say elevator versus an escalator. An escalator only takes you in one direction. An elevator takes you in multiple different, it takes you up and down. So those stages of grief can be experienced like an elevator and not the escalator. So you don't just get there and then once we're at this part, we're totally fine and we're done with it. It shows up in random moments and periods of time. So, to break that down a little bit further, when we're looking at denial. So, denial is not just trying to believe that or making yourself believe that something didn't happen. Sometimes it is that first protective survival mechanism of something happening. Because if everything came to us all at one time, how would we handle that? How would we process that? How would we be able to say, this is what happened and this is the next thing that I do? So, denial is sometimes a little safety net in a sense that allows us to be buffered to all the other emotions that will probably show up from that experience. So, it's going into shock and not having this real life experience of what's happening. Then, when we're moving into the aspect of what they refer to as bargaining, and when you're looking at bargaining, it's kind of the negotiation phase of is there something that can be done differently? Is this something that if I take the place to do this versus do that, would this change what has happened? Then from there, when we look at the emotion of anger, anger is kind of like the general term of like this ball up, overwhelming, um, massive range of emotions that kind of come at one time. So it's unfortunate because anger sometimes is the easiest emotion that we connect with and identify because we sometimes don't have the ability to use the other emotions and feelings like I'm fearful, I'm frustrated, I'm irritable, I am uncomfortable, I feel unsafe. So, anger is typically the one that we can easily identify with, but sometimes anger is the wrapped up ball of all of those emotions all at one time. So, from anger, then the reference to depression. And depression is more of the relationship of the sadness that we are experiencing from the feelings that we are slowly kind of coming into the reality of the events that have happened and taken place, and how we're starting to realize that things are changing and things are different, and we're losing some of the things that we originally had before the event. And then the other, and what they consider to be that final term, would be acceptance. So, accepting that this was an event that happened and things are changing because this has happened. And it's not, like I mentioned, these steps that you go through. So it's like, well, I've experienced, bargaining. So now I should be moving, into anger. And it's just like, no, because you can actually experience anger before you experience bargaining. And you can experience depression before you experience anger. And it's just because these waves of feelings and emotions are also part of how you're processing the events that have taken place. So, when we look at that, there's grief on one side of this event, but then there's another side to this event, and there is trauma. So, trauma is an emotional response to pretty much a terrible event that has happened. And sometimes these events are just so terrible that we don't have the ability to just cope with what's happening. And now we are in this place where we have an event, we don't know how to really process the event, and now we are kind of left with emotionally trying to figure out how do we deal with these things. So we put an event such as sexual assault, grief from this event, but we typically identify with the trauma from the event. So we are going to travel down a little bit of a journey of what that grief is and why it is unique to sexual assault survivors. If we look at the experiences that individuals have had related to sexual assault, and I'm going to just speak in a general because everyone's experience is individual and different for them. So when we're looking at the experience of that traumatic event, that terrible event of sexual assault. And we tend to kind of align that with grief from that experience. What does that look like? Some things happen during those type of events. One, you are violated. You are violated not at your will, not by your choice, and you have a freedom before that happens. You have independence before that happens. You have safety before that happens. And so now this event kind of upheavals, and flips a lot of things in your life upside down. And it changes from one event that can change your whole life and what you had a life that looked like before the event and what your life ends up kind of turning into after. So when we look at that from that grief lens, and I'll refer to it as a lens instead of referring to it as stages, because this is a different way to actually look at it. So when you're looking at it from that grief lens, so if we're looking at before the event, I had an independence. I had a feeling that I could make choices to do things, to say yes, to say no, to be able to change my mind about something. And then this event happens. And now what I felt that I had, I now it's being challenged that I no longer have. Now I feel like I've lost my independence when I can choose when something happens to say yes, to say no, to change my mind. And now I have lost that feeling that this is not something that I have control over anymore. So there's that feeling of this sadness. There's this feeling of that frustration, that irritability, that anger that happens because now something that you once had now changes into something you feel that you don't have anymore. When you're looking at, we have what we call like our autonomy to our bodies, our that ability to say this is mine, and who I choose to share it with is how I get to share it and when I decide to share it. And an event happens, and then that feeling gets taken away, and not feeling that my body is not just my body anymore because it's been violated and taken against the will of the right that I felt that I had. And so again, turns into that space of you can feel angry about that. You can feel sadness about that. You feel that ability to, when we talk about the denial, it's the I had it, but I am not really truly wanting to say that I don't anymore. Even though part of me may feel like I don't, but I don't want to just say that I don't anymore and not feeling like I want to lose that. So I'm going to kind of try to see if I can push this experience off as if it did not occur, if it did not happen, so I can try to continue to live my life the way it was before the event happened. And in most scenarios, what happens is that that tends to catch up with us. So we turn into people who may feel like we've lost a sense of safety. Even though I want to believe that I did not lose that sense of safety, it tends to transform into being what they would call hypervigilant, or where you're just like, you're super aware of things that are happening and going on around you. And what that does is that it takes you away from the ability to feel present in the spaces that you're in because you're looking for the danger or the potential for the danger versus saying, I'm in a space, I feel safe, and I'm able to be present in this space that I'm in. So, losing that feeling of safety, losing that feeling of having the autonomy for your body, losing that feeling of independence. And then we travel a little bit further in this journey, and our relationships tend to change. The dynamics of our relationships tend to change because the experience now has you feeling like you're different from other people, or people don't understand the experience that you had. And it's like, if someone didn't have this experience, how do I connect with them? How do I talk with them? How do I spend time with them? How do I continue to have relationships with people when I have had a different experience that makes me different? And then it puts you into a space of feeling isolated, where you don't want to. share with people. And sometimes not wanting to share is not wanting to relive the trauma from that experience, which also kind of goes into that space of if I don't talk about the experience, then I can kind of push that off as if I didn't have the experience. But it is an experience that you had, and it is a traumatic experience. So, how you navigate that is very difficult and different. So, your relationships start to become different. So, you may not spend the time that you normally would spend time with people. And it is not that you don't love them or you don't care about them, but how you have been impacted by your experience changes how you look at your relationships. Are your relationships safe? Do you feel safe enough to share these things? Do you feel like you will be judged about what you share about these things? And so that dynamic of your relationship start to look different. So if it's relationships with parents, relationship with siblings, relationships with friends, it could be romantic relationships. It could be professional relationships. A lot of those relationships can take a turn because of the experience that you had. And now we're looking at there's a loss in the relationships that I had, and those relationships were really important to me. So now we're looking at the loss of that freedom, the loss of our autonomy, the loss of our safety, the loss of our relationships. And now we're looking at how you navigate this life and going forward. The trip to the store is not the same trip to the store. How you decide to dress may not be the same way you choose to want to dress because of how your experience may have had an impact on you. A lot of those things will end up changing. And it's not because you want them to change, it's because the traumatic experience that you had, you don't want to have another experience like that. So the bargaining part sometimes, like, well, what can I do differently to not have an experience look like that again? So it may be how you connect with strangers or interact with strangers. It might be how I wore this on this day when this happened. So I want to make sure that I don't wear something like this again. Or I might have had my hair in a certain way. I might have wore a certain, type of scent or something. And then just starting to just think about like, what can I do differently so I don't have an experience like that again? So then you start to lose part of your identity because when we choose to dress, how we choose to wear our hair, what we choose to put on ourselves as aesthetics. So, like, it might be certain types of, hair adornment. It might be the scents that you wear. It might be jewelry that you put on. So, when those things, we typically we come into ourselves, and these are ways like our identity, how we dress, and things that we accessorize ourselves with, the scents that we wear, they become part of who we are. It's a form of expression of who we are. So then we go into a space that we no longer want to present that way because we don't want that to be, if this what we feel is a connection to what that experience was, then we want to change that. So then you start to lose your identity of who you are. You were probably, an outgoing, fun person who liked to, share time with your friends and like go to places where you could listen to music, dance, share, have a drink, and just be the person that you were. And now you feel that that part has been taken away and you're not able to be that person anymore. So each each time there's a part of you that gets lost from that event that has taken place, that traumatic experience that you've had. So when we're looking at this trauma and this grief, and sometimes I do refer to it as a traumatic grief because it's a traumatic loss that you end up experiencing, and how you end up navigating your life after that experience. So now we are in this space where I have been the person before the event, and now the person after event has lost a lot of different things. And now it's this process of being, who am I? Who am I now after this? Am I the person of this event? Or what am I? Who am I? And how do I become a person after this event? And looking at, I've lost a lot of things because of this event. And how do I regain, recover, and sometimes it's redefine who I am after an event. And the empowering and beautiful thing about being able to redefine who you are after a traumatic event is you are allowed to do that. You are allowed to establish that. You have the ability to be empowered to determine who you're going to be after this event. So, part of the process of what happens and what you will do is there's a grief process that happens with this. And because sometimes the focus is on trauma more than it is about the grief of looking at the things that you have lost. So even in this space, like right now, and the things that I kind of have shared with you, if you think about what have you lost, or like, oh, I didn't realize that that was something that I lost. If you could just take like a minute and just think about, like, I didn't realize this was something that I lost as part of this event. Like, what type of things would that be? And again, it's something that could be put into the chat. It's something that you can just think about and just take that self reflection on your own and be able to identify those things. We talked about freedom, we talked about autonomy, we talked about independence, we talked about identity, we talked about safety. So there's relationships, professional, personal, romantic. Um, so there's a lot of different things that, because of a traumatic event that happened, of the things that we end up losing because of that. And in that process, we can grieve the things that we have lost. And that is part of what we would refer to as your healing process. You're developing the resilience. Exactly. So I see you with the ability to socialize, um, feeling safe in locations, to set boundaries. Absolutely. And we're going to talk about that actually. We're going to talk about boundaries, and how the resiliency is being built, and the redefining who you are, redefining how to grieve the process of the things that you have lost, and also in this process of how you get to redefine what your life gets to look like after this event and the experiences of this traumatic event. And I use the word traumatic, and I use the word frequently because I, as what we spoke about the fear of letting go. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, and so, and the term trauma, again, the trauma is in is the emotions that are connected to a terrible event. So the event that was experienced was a terrible event. You are not the event. So to understand that, I use that word as just that reminder that it was an event that happened, but it was not you that caused the event to happen, to lose control or relax. So those are those losses, those types of losses have an impact on how you live your day to day. And to have fear, to have the feelings of you've lost control, to have the not have the ability to go in places and feel safe, to not have the ability to relax, all affects how you live your day to day. And to have that be the way that you move through your day is not, it's not healthy. That we talk about things that are healthy and things that are not healthy, things that are empowering for you. So all of those things that you mentioned are things that you lost. They also make you feel that you absolutely, absolutely, and how that impacts how you live your day to day, but how you feel that you lost. And I'm going to use just a big blanket term, and how you've lost the control and power. The process of navigating the grief and acknowledging these things that are happening actually kind of transforms into the ability to empower yourself to redefine who you are and how you're going to move forward with your experiences and engaging and interacting with life after this. So it is, as we talk about grief, grief is not something that you just move through and then there's a completion point. So it's not like, absolutely, absolutely. And just as a whole, a lot of that loss of feeling vulnerable and being vulnerable with interactions with other people. And so moving through the process is not like just going through a tunnel and just saying we come in, we go through it, and then we're just out on the other side. It's a lot of navigations. It's almost kind of like going on a hiking trail. There's a lot of twists and turns and a lot of navigation that happens in order for you to get from one point to the other. So in healing journeys, there's like not a final destination where you say I'm healed. Um, Renegotiating identity. And so when you're looking at, and I really, I am grateful for everyone who is actually responding in the chat and sharing your your feelings and identifying the things that you have lost because of that traumatic experience. Absolutely. And so how you share that, you are also the strength and the power that it takes for you to share that. I actually am uplifting you and commending you for you to be able to do that and share that in this space. And what's also the happening is that someone else is going to see that and they're going to connect with that and they're going to realize something, that one, they are not alone with how they are feeling. And that also allows people to lift up or kind of uncover the isolation that happens from those experiences, and knowing that I am not alone because someone else is actually feeling the lack of the loss of vulnerability. Someone else is actually feeling losing trust in the intentions of other people. Someone else is actually feeling that I don't feel safe going into places. And knowing that you're not alone in those experiences are it's this community that's actually being just created in this space, and being able to look at it that way, that I applaud you and I thank you for being able to share those openly in that way. So when we look at grief, as again, grief is the response to a loss. There's other emotions that will happen, and I'm just going to touch on them a little bit because this is also part of that process when we are dealing with those different things. Um, the emotions that we are dealing with sometimes can transform into depression. And depression is it's like a feelings of like hopelessness, feelings of things will not get better. And they can go from, I feel like this in this moment, and I feel like this for a week. And sometimes I feel like this for months. And as a person out of transparency who um, also is a survivor and also has been on a healing journey for a while, but also a person who deals with depression as well, is that when we're having those feelings and knowing that, one, to share with a person that we can safely confide in that we are having these feelings, and allowing others to support us to navigate getting support with those types of feelings. So having depression and acknowledging that you have depression does not make a person weak. It does not make a person dysfunctional. It does not make a person defective. It makes a person be a human who is dealing with human experiences. And sometimes we need help with that. And then we talked about trauma and how grief is the responses to a loss. But then there's also the response to trauma. And what happens is that there is the post traumatic stress responses, or the responses that we have after we've experienced a traumatic event. And typically that shows up as us kind of, we end up replaying that event. We end up thinking about that event, and how and where I tend to put the grief into that aspect is because when we look at that one term bargaining, how we go through the what ifs or if onlys. And we're, what if I would have done this differently? If only I would have done this. And how we tend to want to change the scenario of the experience to have not have had that happen in the first place. And it is something that actually, it can have an impact on your life. And so from what individuals are actually sharing here in this space, you're sharing also how that experience has had an impact on your life. And that impact kind of transforms how you do your day to day living. And the goal is that the experience doesn't go away, but allowing yourself to build up your resilience, to build up that empowerment, and to use those tools to start to change the way how you interact and you navigate through your life. after the experience. So when we talk about the uniqueness, and we touched on it, and we kind of just we did like this part of grief, and this is how it is unique to survivors of sexual assault. So when we talk about that loss of safety, we talk about that loss of trust, we talk about that loss of your bodily autonomy, we talk about the loss of your identity, we talk about the isolation because of the stigma related to sexual assault survivors. Um, People tending to want to, and sometimes thinking that we are at fault for the incident or the experience that had happened. And it puts you in such a space where the getting the access to be able to grieve your experiences and your losses tend to get lost in a sense because we are still dealing with the emotions from that traumatic experience. So, not understanding that part of our healing journey also means we need to grieve the things that we have lost. And part of the process first is being able to identify those things, which people that have been on this webinar have been amazing with identifying what they have lost and the experiences connected to that. And so, emotionally, the feelings of sometimes feeling guilty, feeling ashamed, feeling that sadness, feeling that you don't have the control that you once had anymore. And like all of that is actually gone. And how do I get that back? And the saying to get something back before an experience is it's almost wanting to not, like, if we could just skip over it as if it's something that didn't happen. But the the place in which survivors move into is, I'm really big on redefining is giving us the ability to control what that actually looks like and after our experience. So if you could honestly wave a magic wand and say, this is something I would like to have after this experience, what would be that thing that you would like to be able to have? Because if we identify the loss in trust in the men, and if the way that I would feel to redefine, I would like to redefine how I would be able to trust men. I would like to be able to redefine. So it's more like changing the narrative. I would like to be able to redefine feeling safe in spaces that I go into. I would like to have the opportunity to redefine not questioning my identity or being able to redefine my identity. And part of that is to recognize again what we've lost and knowing in this process of navigating the grief is also the process of being able to redefine what our lives look like after experiences. And so redefining and grieving takes a couple things. One, it takes us. It takes you as an individual to be able to say, I deserve to grieve the losses that I have experienced. Yes, the ability to be yourself and to regulate You deserve to have the ability to be yourself. You deserve to have the ability to regulate. You are empowered to be able to do that. So redefine how you deserve to be treated and how you love. Absolutely. So to be able to redefine something that you know that you have lost. And so with the process of redefining something, just like the process of grieving, one, it takes time, it takes awareness, it takes you, it takes the fact that you deserve all of this. So you deserve to grieve, you deserve to redefine, and you can feel empowered into the ability to do all of that. So if we take emotionally, you deserve to be able to redefine your identity. In the process of the grieving, you have lost part of your identity. If we look at what part of our identity did we lose? Like, did I lose that part of your identity? Might have been that you were the funny, outgoing one. You were the one who joked all the time. And now you have lost that part of you. Now you deserve to grieve that I lost that part of me, but I also get to redefine what my identity looks like. What would joy look like for me? What would happiness look like for me? And it doesn't necessarily have to be on a grand scale because small steps allow us to enjoy like the outcome to what could be something big, but it takes little small steps to get there in order for us to have that full enjoyment. So if it's the first thing that I have to do, because if we look at how we're looking at all of this and having the traumatic experience in order to be able to grieve loss, one of the biggest things is where I feel that the biggest loss that a lot of people may agree of having is the loss of safety, the loss of feeling safe around people, especially people sometimes that we don't know. Sometimes it could be people that we know. And when I mention about that loss of relationships, because it also depends on who, might you have had that encounter with, um, can also have an impact on how your relationships and the loss of those relationships are. But grieving allows us to acknowledge that we've experienced a loss with something and to be able to identify what those things are and saying, okay, I acknowledge that I have lost this connection, relationship with this person, but I deserve to redefine how my relationships will look going forward with. It can be that person, it can be a totally different person. It doesn't have to be, it can just be as a whole. I deserve to redefine how my relationships look with a person. But it starts with safety. So I get to redefine what I consider to be safe to me because of the safety that I've lost. And it might be I identify that I don't feel safe in certain spaces. I identify that I have lost the sense of safety around certain people. So I am going to acknowledge and I am going to grieve the loss of the sense of safety in this place or with these people, but I also deserve to redefine what safety looks like for me. So, and I don't remember the name of the person who mentioned the loss of safety. If you, because you deserve to, redefine how safety looks for you, what would you vision safety being for you? And you don't have to respond in the chat. If you do, that's appreciated. If you don't, it's also reflective. And so I would do an example. So my safety was I lost the sense of safety in a space for me that originally I felt was safe, because the people that were involved I originally felt was safe. So now I don't feel the sense of safety. I have lost the sense of safety around people who, one, are male, that I would identify as male, and in their home space, because I deserve to redefine what safety looks like for me. How I would feel safe is I will meet people in a public space that I determine is safe for me. So if I feel safe at Starbucks, um, I am going to meet a person at Starbucks. Um, I am also going to choose to have the person that I feel safe with to be with me. So I already have identified who I feel safe with. And then I get to identify and say, this is where I feel safe. So if the request was, well, we can have a gathering at my house. Currently, right now, I don't feel safe in people's houses. And I don't have to explain that, as saying I don't feel safe in people's houses. But I do have the ability to say, why don't we meet here instead? And I'm just going to slide over because someone commented, and I want to acknowledge you with that. For safety for me now, feeling empowered to choose the method and pace of communication I have with new people in my life. I love that. And kudos to you for sharing that. I love when people are sharing in the space, because it takes a strength, um, to do that. And so I applaud you for really, truly taking that ability to step out and share that and being able to redefine how you feel safe and what you need, because all of this is about us as individuals and our own experiences and how and what we need to be able to redefine our lives, being able to go forward. So when we talk about supporting survivors, we just talked about safe spaces, creating safe spaces. So when a person shares with you that, yes, this is a great idea, let's do this, and you share, actually, I would feel better if we did this or we could do this. For you to be able to support a person sharing that with you, because there is a reason why when we ask for something, we're asking for a reason. It's not that you always have to inquire, well, why? Why do you want to do this? It's just know that there is a reason. and respect and honor that. So if the suggestion comes up, how can we honor that suggestion? Being a supporter to a survivor. Um, when a person is sharing something or they want to be transparent, saying, you know what, I feel this way, or because of this, I feel this. And listening to understand, but not listening to respond. Super, super important because it takes a lot of strength for a survivor to share aspects of their life with someone after a traumatic experience. So, be it that you are the person that they are allowing themselves to feel that with, it again goes back to the safety. And they are trying their best to redefine and reestablish that safety for themselves and using their ability to feel empowered to do so. So, being able to listen, to understand, and not to respond, and feeling the way to how can I honor and support them in that way is actually really important. And you can show that without publicly displaying that just by being able to do that. It is how you communicate. Someone had mentioned the pace of communication. And when a person is communicating with you, you are observing that if we, you know, would you prefer to talk in a text? Would you prefer a phone call? Did you want me to call you or did you want to call me? Or you can just shoot me a text. Sometimes I like text messages because of the fact that it allows me to have control of when I respond, how I respond, and the interpretation of what's given to say, I can seek clarification because I didn't understand what you said to me in a neutral space for myself. And so I'm a very big texter. Because of that, and it allows me to still have and regain control over my experiences because of that. And so you asking sometimes, is it better that we text? And then, I text sometimes and I just out of habit sometimes mirror that is that, is this a good time to call? Do you have, a moment to be able to talk? Is it a good time to talk? And allow a person to respond to you to say, no, but I'll reach out to you, when it is a good time. And allowing them to be able to feel empowered and to be able to regain that control to navigate that. Um, Also, that feeling of the confidence, of being yourself, losing that confidence and your emotions, are it is very challenging. So when you have that process to grieve, I'm grieving the loss of the ability to be myself. And I also deserve to redefine how I build up that confidence to who I am and being myself. Because sometimes it is the ability to redefine who we are and who we see ourselves being. And as far as the regulating emotions, um, it's the part of the trauma that makes it difficult to regulate those. So when we're grieving the response of losing control, I deserve to redefine what control looks like for me and taking the steps to actually see it. And so when a person is supporting you, it's learning about what we need to feel safe, what we need to feel to be in control, what we feel to be empowered. And there are things that we need, the things that you need to have that, to be able to experience that. And working with an advocate, working with a therapist, working with someone that is supporting you, that you feel safe with, to identify what that is because it's building blocks to the process. It's really identifying, identifying what you've lost, allowing yourself the space and the time to grieve what you've lost, and then having the ability to realize that you deserve to redefine what that's going to look like going forward. So when you have a person that you feel safe with, which could be a therapist, it could be a counselor, it could be an advocate, it could be a case manager, someone that you're working with that is supporting you navigating this space and saying, okay, I was on this webinar and I realized that I haven't really allowed myself like to really grieve things from this experience. I realized that I have not grieved the fact that I've lost my identity. I have not grieved the fact that I've lost control. I have not grieved that I've lost the feeling of safety in spaces. I have not grieved that I've lost trust in men. I have not grieved these things. But now I am starting to see that these are things that I have not grieved, but I have been carrying them in this space with no place to put them. So, in order for me to redefine, in order for me to take control, to feel empowered, to be able to do this and say, I want to redefine because I deserve to feel safety. I deserve to feel control. I deserve to have my identity. I deserve to feel comfortable and confident in myself. I deserve to be able to have trusting relationships and connections with people. I deserve that. And so I want to start working on redefining those things that I have lost. Because the intention is not to go back to get those things, but redefine those things. Because after your experience, you're different. And what you need to navigate life going forward will likely be different. And how you get to redefine that is up to you. And you get to pull back and tap into feeling empowered and controlled and safe. And it's not something that you tackle all at one time, it happens over periods of time. Safety is a really big one for a lot of people because if I don't feel safe, how can I work on redefining, controlling my spaces and my environments? How do I work on redefining my identity, redefining what I feel as being confident, redefining relationships? The biggest thing is that I have to redefine what safety is and what it looks like for me now, and how I take steps to redefining safety. And so when there's another aspect of when we look at grief and we look at trauma, we're looking at people who are supporting survivors. So one of the things we talk about is secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. And if you are working with a person who's experienced trauma, which means an event that a terrible event that has happened to someone, it is very likely that you are going to kind of take a little bit of that trauma um, from what they're sharing with you. When people are advocates and supporters and workers of people who've experienced trauma, tend to take a lot of that. And they are like, in a sense, sponges. So as you are sharing, the people who are there and are passionate and they're also helping you are also like picking up little pieces from you. And they are just like, we want to help them. We want to, be able to do all the things. And then the passion just flows. And it's like, I will do whatever I need to do to support you in regaining that safety, that control, that identity, that trust. and now being able to support you with grieving those things that you have lost because of that traumatic experience. So, people who are working in these spaces experience something secondary or vicarious trauma. Secondary trauma can be because I've heard your story that you've shared with me. Vicarious trauma is I've heard your story, I've heard your story, I've heard your story, I've heard your story, and I've heard your story. So we are continuously hearing stories and stories and stories. And so you become the sponge of the stories. And now you collected the stories, and now there's no place for them to land or no place for you to place them. So what happens is that the things that we were just speaking about with survivors, you also, some of that tends to carry over to you. Some of that experiencing hypervigilance, in spaces, lack of trust of people, questioning their intentions, looking at people through a different lens, like, this person is a harmful person, or going to these spaces are now harmful spaces because now you are also taking on the life of some of their experiences as well. So taking that on, and so when people are experiencing, PTSD from their traumatic experiences, you can also be experiencing PTSD from their traumatic experiences as well. And also you experience burnout because of that. And burnout will look like being as similar to a person experiencing PTSD, being irritable, being easily frustrated, being angry, being very short tempered about things, feeling overwhelmed about things, not being able to say, um, I need to step back from this and regain a sense of myself from this. And I am just really, now I can't sleep. Now my nutrition and things that I would do for myself are falling off. Now my interactions and relationships with people, family, friends, and work environment are also being impacted and challenged. And now I'm feeling in this space. And now what do I do? Because how am I being supportive and supporting other people? And now I am now like I am now experiencing and feeling very similar things that the people that I am supporting are experiencing. And now what do I do? Because one thing I know that I don't ever want to negotiate with is not being able to support the people that I'm supporting. And I just seen, and so it's like, now what? So I'm just going to pause just for a minute right there to see if there's any comments that have dropped in. Um, or if there's any comments you want to add. Yes, taking time for healing yourself. It is actually important because as we are pushing the message to tell them to take care of themselves, we're telling survivors, take care of yourself. Make sure that you advocate for yourself. Make sure you feel empowered. Make sure you're doing all these things. And guess what? You're not doing it. You have to, you are also not just the advocate, you are not just the supporter, you are not just a person who is passionate on allowing people to reclaim and redefine their lives. To You are also a person who will be mirroring what you would like for them to see and experience. um, so let's talk about, and this is in both places. It's both from a survivor's aspect and it's also both from a supporter's aspect too. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, what do we need to do? I Self care, self care, self care, self care, self care, self care. um, and I say that in this way because kind of that's the way people say it. Self care, self care. We need to do self care, self care, self care, self care, self care, self care, and self care. And it's like, what the hell is that? Like, what the hell is self care? Um, when I care so much about the people that I'm serving. What is self care when I have had a traumatic experience that I don't feel safe? Um, what is that? So, if we look at self care, what do you feel is self care? Um, what I would tell you, what I don't feel self care is spa days and bubble baths. Um, can it be part of it? Yes, but is that it? No. So let's talk about what could be self care. Um, Self care. When people say boundaries, like, well, what are boundaries? boundaries. Boundaries are not what you expect people to do. Boundaries are more for you than they are for other people. So we'll start with that foundation really quick. Um, so boundaries are not you telling people how to behave. Boundaries are you saying, I'm going to behave if someone does this to me. So when we talk about boundaries, is it just as simple as like, I'm going to say no when someone says da 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 da? Because when you have had a traumatic experience, you have lost a lot of things, including how to sometimes say no. So, how do you put in place what boundaries would look like for you? Boundaries could be from a survivor's aspect that if I am having a conversation with someone and I feel that this conversation no longer feels safe or I feel threatened by the conversation, I'm going to end the conversation. If I feel that I'm in a space that I went to that I initially felt that it was safe, and now I no longer feel safe in this space, I am going to remove myself from the space. I don't have to ask other people to leave. I don't have to explain that this space is no longer feeling safe to me. I am going to say, I think I'm going to head home now. I think I'm going to leave now. And the question typically, because we're human beings, people are like, well, why? Well, we're having a great time. It's just like, no, I just think that it's a good time for me to go. Um, Sometimes just blame it on the cat that you don't have it. And just say, you know what, I actually have to go home. My cat's got diabetes. I got to go give him a shot. Nobody knows. Um, or it's just that, like actually I have another appointment that I have to get to, and I kind of like timed myself out for this. And so how we do our boundaries don't have to be these, really scientific, very elaborate type of things. It's just like use what you got to get what you need to do something different. So if you don't have a cat right now, everybody has a cat with diabetes, and just go ahead and you need to use your cat with diabetes. If the conversation is something that needs to end, and I'll share an example, a personal example. Um, when I feel that someone's emotions are overcoming for me or overwhelming for me, there is typically someone waiting on my other line. Or I realize that I have to call someone back now. And you know what? I forgot. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I have to call, I forgot I have to call this person back. I'll give you a call a little bit later. Later can be tomorrow, next week, next month, whatever. Um, but I'm going to give you, I got to excuse myself and remove myself from this space. And how that is done, you tend to maneuver it in a way that works for you. You don't owe anyone an explanation. You don't owe anyone any details of anything. You owe yourself the ability to feel safe in whatever is happening and to allow yourself to find safety for yourself. A boundary could be, I have supported some people today, and so I am going to choose not to turn on the news or scroll through social media, but I am going to put on a comedy show today and I am going to laugh. And that is all that I'm going to do. I am not going to take any phone calls from anyone. I will put my phone on Do Not Disturb. And typically the phone goes ring, 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 ring. And then I'll get a text message and say, I tried to call you. And it's like, actually, yeah, the phone said so. It's okay. But I am going to take this opportunity to allow myself to feel grounded by, I might do some mindfulness activities. I might do a crossword puzzle. I might color in a coloring book. I might listen to some of my favorite songs that, bring me joy. And I am okay with whatever that looks like today because I'm only providing for what I need in this moment. If we're looking at how do I create safe spaces for myself, sometimes right now your home may feel safe for you. And who do I identify as being a safe person for me? And you're not clinging to people when you identify a person that's safe for you because right now everybody else outside of that is not. So if you, and typically when people find out that you identify them as a safe person, people are very honored by that. And they hold that in a very positive, like heartwarming space. And they know like how important that is for you. So if it's saying, I really would like to go out and get coffee, um, are you available to go get coffee with me? And that person will be like, sure, well, where do you want to go? Um, I don't know, I want to try this place. And, well, yeah, sure, we can go get coffee. And a person supporting will say, okay, we get coffee. You want to have a seat? Have a seat, you know? Okay, start having conversation. And then it's like, are we good? You ready to go? It's like, no, I'm good. We'll stay. Okay. Then, you just check in and say, you ready to go? We good? We finished our coffee. You want another cup? You want? So to be able to, the words that I actually want to leave you with, um, because we talk about empowered, being empowered. We talk about feeling comfortable, confident, safe. What I want to leave you with is you're right. You have the right to grieve things that you have lost. You have a right to redefine what your life is going to look like now. You deserve to grieve the things that you have lost. You deserve to redefine the life that you have now. And does that look like boundaries of saying, what do I need? And boundaries are not for you to tell people how to treat you. Your boundaries are for you to say, if I'm being treated this way, I have the right and I deserve to remove myself from anything that does not feel right for me, that does not feel safe for me, that does not feel comfortable for me, that does not allow me to be who I am, where I am right now. And the other thing that I want to leave you with is that you got this. It's not easy. Um, Redefining after a traumatic experience is very difficult. It was not your fault. It was never your fault. And you, at some point in your journey, of this healing journey that you're on, um, deserve to be loved, safe, supported, uplifted, and to feel empowered to do whatever, however, you need to do to redefine your life. So I believe we might have a couple minutes left for any comments. Anybody who would like to either just unmute and talk or share, or just take a moment to be proud of yourself for showing up for yourself today and knowing that you don't have to stay in a space. Like, we're constantly evolving as human beings, just our cells are growing constantly, even though you know, I'm looking at you right now. Believe me, there are cells that are leaving my body as new cells are being made right now. Um, and so to remind yourself as supporters to advocate for yourself the way that you advocate for the people you are serving, to take time for yourself and encourage yourself the way that you encourage the people that you are serving. And the same way that they have the right and they deserve, you have the right and you deserve as well. So be okay understanding that the supporter sometimes needs support as well. Um, in saying that, and also if self care means I am taking some time for myself to disconnect so I can reconnect is okay. There is no glory in being the burnt out, overworked person. There's not. Um, but you have the ability to show the people that you're supporting what this looks like and how it can look. So give yourself that power to be able to do that too.
Thank you so much. Um, I really appreciate your statement about you are not the trauma. The trauma is the event.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like when a traumatic experience happens, we take it in um, to a detrimental degree, and just reminding ourselves that we are not the event. The trauma is the event,
Yes,
and we are able to process and walk through that.
yes, yes, absolutely.
I also want to say thank you so much to everyone for being here. I know
Absolutely.
talking about trauma is difficult, um, but I'm very thankful that you all took the time to be here today. And I hope that you have some peace and some grace with yourself for the rest of your day as well.
Yes,
Um, if you have to go back to work, I hope you have a moment where you can, like Chantel just said, just breathe and just be before you have to be an adult again. Michaela, so it has to process through YouTube and whatnot, and my internet isn't always the fastest. So it might be later on today or Monday at the latest because I am out of the office tomorrow. And we'll send it out to the folks who registered. Absolutely.